has rolled out his version of the Green New Deal. And of course, he has been very supportive of the ambitious plan that came out earlier with AOC. Now, that wasn't binding legislation. What Sanders is doing is proposing what would be his binding legislation, and it's incredibly comprehensive. Sanders was an early supporter of the Green New Deal, an ambitious but non-binding congressional plan for tackling global warming and economic inequality. He's bestowing that same name upon his new plan, which calls for the United States to eliminate fossil fuel use by 2050. The fossil fuel use was the centerpiece of the Green New Deal. So of course he's going to mention that as the centerpiece of his. But once you get into the details, it shows a timeline that isn't really, that hasn't been used in other proposals. So let me tell you what that is. Sanders' plan calls for an intermediate goal of decarbonizing transportation and power generation, the two largest sources of emissions in the United States, by 2030, which would lower US emissions by 71%. The plan also calls for the United States to help developing countries curb emissions by 36% during that period of time, by 2030.
I want to say two things about that. First, most plans say that we need to have our fuel emissions by 2030. Sanders goes further and says, no, let's go past 50%. Let's go all the way to 71%. We believe that it's doable. And then he sets aside over $1 billion to help other countries cut their emissions as well. So this is the exact opposite of right-wing ideology. They say, oh, well, screw everybody else. Who cares about them? But I don't know if you guys know this, we all live on the same planet. And so he's saying, if you're really gonna tackle climate change, we need to incentivize other countries that are developing countries that are not as economically well off as we are, to go in the right direction as well. And we lead by example.
Yeah, and by the way, it makes sense. So look, some people might be thinking, I mean, of course the right wing thinks that this is just a giant hoax and there's no need for it. But some people might be thinking, well, this sounds expensive. There's a giant jobs component to it, which we'll get to in just a second. And one other thing I wanted to note is that study after study shows that if we want to save our existence on this planet, we have no choice but to eliminate carbon emissions. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change last year reported that if countries want to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius this century, they need to cut by half carbon emissions by 2030 and become carbon neutral by 2050 and then go carbon negative thereafter. That's a super lofty goal, but it's important to accomplish that. Also, the New Deal provided inexpensive electricity to America through efforts like the Rural Electrification Administration and the Federal Power Marketing Administrations. If the federal government was able to electrify America under FDR without computers or any of the modern technologies we have available to us today, think of what we can do today. And that's a statement from Bernie Sanders on his Green New Deal proposal. And by the way, we are the top country when it comes to carbon emissions. So when it comes to foreign aid to countries, in assisting them to cut their carbon emissions, I think it only makes sense.
Yeah, so this would add 20 million jobs. Now, we don't even have 20 million jobs available at this point. So basically they're saying it would create no unemployment. And that's a fascinating concept. I'm worried that probably is not going to be the case. I'm worried that there's gonna be a crash and a recession even before the next president. And then when all those people lose their jobs, though, this would be a good way to revitalize the economy. And then that's when the right wing will say, no, we're out of money, it crashed. And they'll forget that they already gave all the money to the rich and to the corporations, they'll conveniently forget. And so the reality is a program like this puts the money and the jobs in the hands of average American workers, and it rebuilds our infrastructure like we did under Roosevelt, Truman, and Eisenhower. And I mean, to rebuild our entire energy infrastructure is exciting. And in terms of what the scientists think we should do, what Anna just said is ambitious and lofty. It's true, it is. On the other hand, they've been proven right over and over and over again, so it's not optional. They said that we would break records on temperature, and we did. 16 out of the last 17 years are the hottest on record. They were absolutely right. It's almost as if they're scientists, and 99% of the climate scientists in the world agree. And so when they say we have to do these things, they're not just guessing, and it's not optional. We got to do it. It is an actual planetary emergency. And if they hadn't been proven right already and it was just a theory, that would be one thing. But they've been proven right in every instance so far.
So I just want to get to the final part of this. And again, his plan is so comprehensive, and I encourage you to read all the details. But I also want to talk about the cost, because as always, if you read the New York Times coverage of this story, they just talk about the cost. It's so expensive, it's so expensive, how are you gonna pay for it? Well, let's get to that right now. So several 2020 Democrats have called for investment in the trillions of dollars, but in the fine print, these plans include public and private funding. Sanders' plan is notably different because it calls for more money than any of the other candidates, $16.3 trillion in total, and the entire investment budget would come from federal dollars. So he doesn't want any private companies playing a role, and I think that it makes sense. In this case, it makes sense.
Yeah, and guys, I want you to understand what that means. It doesn't mean that we can't ever use private companies to build anything. What it means is, like Trump right now says, when he says infrastructure, he says, well, I don't want the government to build the roads or the bridges. I want private companies to do it and then put a toll on it so they can make a profit off of it. So that means you pay for the rest of your life on those bridges and tolls instead of having the government collectively build that infrastructure, which is a core part of the government's job.
Now, let's talk about how this plan would actually generate money and then help to pay for it. The plan generates money from various sources, including $6.4 trillion in revenue from selling energy via power marketing authorities, $2.3 trillion from income taxes from the new jobs created under the plan. And as Cenk had alluded to earlier, there will be 20 million jobs created by this plan, and $1.2 trillion from reducing military expenses related to protecting oil shipping routes. A lot of that is happening right now in the Strait of Hormuz because of our conflict with Iran.
So I love that one. I have to confess, I hadn't even thought of that. That's true. Like, we spend so much time, resources, and military equipment, et cetera, protecting important oil shipping routes. Well, if we're not using oil anymore, great. And by the way, that also creates less conflict, less potential for war, which is another great side benefit of this.
Yeah, and so Bernie Sanders keeps making the point that, look, we are gonna have this paid for within 15 years. And according to Sanders, the price tag, I totally agree with this, is a bargain compared to the business as usual climate trajectory. Economists estimate that if we do not take action, we will lose $34.5 trillion in economic activity by the end of the century. And that's according to the plan. And that's according to various estimates that I've read, completely aside, separate from this plan.
And that's the number one problem with the mainstream media coverage of this. Vox did a great job, and that's why we're quoting them, because they actually had facts and figures, as opposed to the New York Times going, "Oh, we don't like it, it's expensive." The status quo is more expensive. Same exact situation in healthcare, but a lot of the mainstream media view their job as status quo protection. So they never mention the existing costs. They just talk about, oh, new costs. Well, we can't have new costs. But remember, it would save money in the long run. I mean, look at the fires in California, and he's gonna introduce in Paradise, California, which had the largest fire in state history. And the reason he's doing that is because, to point out, this cost the taxpayers a tremendous amount of money, let alone the damage that it did to the environment and to the humans in California, the citizens, the voters of California. But unfortunately, a lot of the media ignore that completely.